coffee was still hot. I know because I'd been up since 4:30 that morning, driving the gravel switchbacks up Tatro Road in the dark, so I could get the wood stove going before anyone else woke up. I'd carried in 2 armloads of split maple, the dry stuff from the back of the barn that I'd stacked myself in August. I'd swept the porch. I'd put the good mugs out, the ones with the little blue rims that my grandmother used to set out only when company came. I'd even wiped down the long kitchen table, the one my grandfather built out of a single butternut log, the year my father was born. Nobody asked me to. Nobody noticed. There were 9 of us crowded into that kitchen, my parents, my brother Travis and his girlfriend, 2 men in pressed shirts from a company called Saddleback Development, and a man named Dean Mott, who I would come to know very well. They were there to celebrate. My mother had baked. There were papers on the table, a stack of them, and a pen lying across the top like a knife and fork waiting for a meal. My mother looked across that table, set down her fork, and said it. "You don't need to be here for this part, Cora. This is family business." I said, "I am family." She smiled the way she smiled at people who didn't matter. "You're a burden, honey, always have been. The Hales built something out of this land. You just play in the dirt with your sticks and your maps." Travis laughed, not an uncomfortable laugh, not a nervous one, a real laugh, the kind that agrees. "At least somebody in this family knows how to make money off it," he said. My father looked at his plate. I set my mug down on the butternut table. I didn't slam it. I folded the dish towel that was still over my shoulder and laid it on the counter. I took my coat off the hook by the door, the same hook my grandfather hung his coat on for 50 years, and I walked out. No argument, no tears, no slammed door. Just the soft click of the latch behind me and the cold coming up off the dooryard. But here's what none of them knew. The house they were sitting in had not belonged to my parents for 6 years. The land they were about to sell wasn't all theirs to sell. And I was the only person still alive who knew where the corners actually were. Welcome back to Suspense Stories. I'm Cora Hale, 34, a licensed land surveyor from Cobb Hollow, Vermont. This is the story of how my family treated me like hired help on my own grandfather's land for 30 years, called me a burden in the kitchen he built with his hands, and then found out what happens when the person they ignored is the only one who knows what's recorded down at the courthouse. If you've ever been the quiet one who held everything together while somebody else took the credit, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Stay with me because the corners don't lie. People do. My grandfather taught me that before I was old enough to hold the far end of a tape. I was 9 the first time my grandfather took me out to walk the lines. It was a Saturday in October, the sugar maples gone the color of a brush fire, and he came to the back door in his canvas coat with a roll of yellowed paper under his arm and a brass compass in his pocket that had belonged to his father. "Come on, surveyor," he said. He always called me that, years before it meant anything. "Let's go find the corners." We walked the whole 44 acres that day. He showed me the iron pins set deep under the big maple at the northeast corner, the head of it worn smooth, and he made me kneel down and put my hand on it. "That's not a rock," he said. "Somebody set that there on purpose 100 years ago, so that everybody who came after would know exactly where one man's land ended and another's began. You find that pin, you know the truth. You can't argue with a corner." He showed me the drill hole bored into the granite ledge above the spring, a perfect round dimple a man had hammered by hand. He showed me the stone wall that ran the whole west line, every stone of it lifted out of those fields by hands that were dust now. And he showed me where, halfway up the hill, somebody long after had built a barbed wire fence 10 feet east of the wall to steal a little grazing. People will tell you the fence is the line, he said. The fence is never the line. The wall is the line. Find the old work. Find what was set on purpose. That was the first lesson. There were 100 more. My grandfather's name was Asahel. He'd been born in that house in 1931, and he'd die in it. And in between he ran the sugar bush and the small dairy and worked winters at the furniture mill in St. Johnsbury. And every fall of my childhood, he took me out to walk the lines like it was church. By the time I was 12, I could read his old hand-drawn map of the place better than I could read my report card. I knew where the spring fed the pond, where the sugar maples gave the best run, where the lane crossed the wet spot, and you had to lay down corduroy in mud season. I knew that land the way you know a person's face. My brother Travis never came on those walks. Travis was 3 years older, and the sun rose and set on him as far as my mother was concerned. Travis made the high school baseball team, and the whole house rearranged itself around his practice schedule. Travis got the big bedroom over the kitchen, the warm one. I got the little room off the back hall where you could hear the well pump cycle through the wall at night. When I won the regional science fair in 8th grade, a project on soil erosion along the brook, with my grandfather's survey notes folded into the back of the display board. I carried the ribbon home on the bus, holding it flat in my lap so it wouldn't crease. My mother had ordered pizza that night. Not for me, for Travis, because his summer league team had won something. My ribbon sat on the counter, next to the grease-spotted boxes, for 3 days before I moved it to my room. I learned something at 13 that most people learn a lot later. Being the one who's overlooked teaches you to look harder. While everybody watches the loud one, the quiet one is taking measurements. I went to the state university on a scholarship and a job at the campus print shop, and I studied geomatics, which is the modern word for the old thing my grandfather did with a chain and a compass. I learned the law of boundaries, that a deed is just words, and words can lie or be mistaken. But the monument on the ground is the truth the words were trying to describe. I learned that when a written description and a monument disagree, the monument wins. I learned that a survey has to close. You run your lines all the way around a parcel and come back to where you started. And if your numbers don't bring you home to the very same point, then somewhere you've made an error or somebody before you has, and you do not stop until you find it. I loved that. In a family where nothing ever added up, I had found a profession built entirely on the idea that, eventually, everything must. I came home to Vermont. I got my license, 6 years of work, and a 2-day exam, and I went to work for a woman named Ruth Pelletier, who'd been surveying these hills for 30 years and ran a small firm in St. Johnsbury called Pelletier and Stone. Ruth was 58, built like a fence post, and she had no patience for anybody who guessed when they could measure. "We don't decide where the line is, Cora," she told me my first week. "We find where it already is. We're not the judge, we're the witness." She became, over the years, the closest thing I had to family that I'd actually chosen. My grandfather died when I was 28. Quietly in his chair by the wood stove, the way he'd have wanted, with the first snow coming down outside the window. The week before he died, He had me drive him out to the northeast corner one last time. His legs weren't good by then, so we went slow. He put his hand on that iron pin under the maple, the way he'd made me do when I was 9, and he said, "You're the only one of them who ever cared where this was." Then he said something I didn't fully understand for 6 more years. "Cora, I've taken care of it," he said. "It's done right. Down at the registry, it's all done right. But I need you to let your father keep his pride a while. Let them stay in the house. The land knows who it belongs to, and so do you, and that'll have to be enough until it isn't. Promise me you won't make a fuss." I promised. I'd have promised that man anything. I didn't know yet what he'd done. I found out 3 weeks after the funeral, standing at the long counter of the Caledonia County Registry of Deeds, with a clerk named Donna sliding a photocopy across to me. Because I'd gone in to pull the records the way a surveyor does when she wants to understand a piece of ground. And there it was, recorded years earlier, in his careful hand. A deed. In it, my grandfather had divided his 44 acres into 2 parcels. The back 30, the timber lot and the upper field, beautiful land but landlocked, reachable only by the farm lane that ran up from the road. He had left in his will to my father. And the front 14 acres, the homestead, the house, the barn, the sugar bush, the spring, and every foot of frontage on Tatro Road, he had deeded outright years before he died to me. He'd reserved a life estate for himself, which is the legal way of saying he kept the right to live there until he died. And the day he died, by the plain operation of that recorded deed, the homestead became mine. The house, the barn, the land my parents were living on. My grandfather had given me the heart of the place and asked me to keep quiet about it so my father wouldn't feel like a guest in his own childhood home. And I had. For 6 years, I kept that secret folded up small and carried it everywhere, the way I'd carried that science fair ribbon flat in my lap so it wouldn't crease. So here is what those 6 years actually looked like. The part my mother left out of every story she ever told about me. My parents moved into the homestead to take care of Grandpa in his last year, and after he died, they simply stayed. I let them. They were my parents. It was the house they both had memories in, and I was 28 and grieving, and I could not imagine being the person who made her own father move out. So I said nothing, exactly as I'd promised. But somebody had to actually keep the place standing, and that somebody was never going to be Travis, and it was never going to be my parents, who treated the house like it ran on prayer. It ran on me. The property taxes on the homestead parcel came addressed to the estate, then to me, because I was the owner of record, and for 6 years I paid them. Every fall, a little over $4,000 out of my account, quietly, while my mother told the women at church that the kids help out a little. When the barn roof started letting snow in over the old milking floor, I climbed up in October with a man from town, and we put new steel on the south slope, and I paid the $1,100, and my father said the roof must have settled. When the well pump finally died on a January night at 15 below, it was my phone that rang, and I drove out at 11 at night and stood in the cellar hole with the plumber while he replaced it, and I paid for that too. I plowed the lane every storm because I had the truck and the plow, and because my father's back was bad and Travis was never around when there was snow to move. I had a key. I had always had a key. I came every Saturday I could, and I split wood, and I cleaned the gutters, and I bled the radiators. And the whole time my mother introduced me to people as my daughter. She does some kind of measuring work. The way you'd describe the weather on a day nobody remembers. Meanwhile, the family bank account that never seemed to have anything in it for a barn roof always seemed to find money for Travis. Travis, at 37, had a resume that read like a graveyard of enthusiasm. There was the year he was going to turn the sugar bush into an agritourism experience, which got as far as a logo and $1,000 of my mother's savings spent on a website that's still up, technically, with a contact form that goes nowhere. There was the side-by-side rental idea where he bought 2 used off-road machines on a loan my father co-signed and put exactly one of them through the ice on the pond the first December. There was the glamping pod plan, where he was going to put little geodesic domes up in the upper field and rent them to leaf peepers, a plan that died the moment somebody mentioned the words septic permit. His financial contribution to the upkeep of that property over 6 years was not small. It was 0. Not reduced, not occasional, 0. But my mother's story never wavered. Travis is going to do something big with this land. Cora just measures dirt for other people. The cruelest part wasn't even the money. It was the cabin. 3 summers ago, Travis decided he was going to build himself a cabin down by the pond. No permit, no survey, no conversation with anyone, just Travis and 2 of his buddies, and a flatbed of lumber, putting up a little A-frame on the prettiest spot on the whole property, the flat bench above the spring where my grandfather used to set up the evaporator pans in sugar season. My mother thought it was wonderful. Travis is finally putting down roots, she said. I drove out the weekend they poured the slab, and I stood at the edge of the trees, and I felt something go cold and still in my chest, because I am a land surveyor and I did not need a tape to see it. Travis had built his cabin a good 40 feet across the line. He'd built it on my 14 acres, on the homestead, on the parcel my grandfather had deeded to me. He'd sited it by eye, the way he did everything, and his eye had put it square on land he had no idea wasn't his. I almost said something then. I had the deed. I had the corners memorized. I could have ended it that afternoon. But I'd made a promise to a dying man, and the cabin wasn't hurting anything but my pride, and I told myself the same thing I'd told myself for 6 years. It's just family. Let it go. Let him keep his pride. I have learned since that "let him keep his pride" is a sentence people only ever say to themselves. Nobody was protecting mine. If you've ever been the one quietly keeping the lights on while somebody else gets the toast raised in their honor, you already know the particular silence I'm describing. Type the word standing in the comments if you've been there, so I know how many of us there are. Then stay with me, because in October, a stranger drove up Tatro Road in a clean white pickup, and everything I'd been holding still for 6 years finally had to move. The man's name was Roy Keever, and he ran Saddleback Development out of an office down in the Connecticut River Valley. He built what they call executive estate lots, 5-acre house parcels with gravel cul-de-sacs and names like Hollow Ridge, the kind of thing that turns a working farm into 11 driveways. He'd had his eye on the upper end of Tatro Road for a while, and somebody had told him the Hale place might be coming available because somebody had heard Travis at the Elks talking like a man about to come into money. I found out about the deal the way I found out about most things in my family, late and by accident. I was at the Registry of Deeds in St. Johnsbury on a Tuesday, pulling records for a survey I was doing 2 towns over, when Donna the clerk, who'd worked that counter for 20 years, slid a folder across to me without my asking and said, "Cora, isn't this your folks' place?" In the folder was a brand new survey plat, signed and stamped, that somebody had recorded the week before. A plat of the Hale property, 44 acres, drawn as one single parcel, ready to sell. And the surveyor who'd signed it was a man named Dean Mott. I knew Dean Mott. Everyone in the trade up here knew Dean Mott. He was the surveyor you called when you wanted a number to come out a certain way. He worked fast, he worked cheap, and he had a gift for finding whatever line his client was hoping for. Ruth wouldn't let his plats in the office. "That man surveys with an eraser," she used to say. I took the plat to the long table by the window, and I read it the way I read everything, slowly, with a pencil. And the longer I read it, the colder I got. Dean Mott's plat showed the whole 44 acres as one parcel owned by my parents, free and clear, with full frontage on Tatro Road, ready to convey to Saddleback Development. It did not show the severance. It did not reference my grandfather's recorded deed, the one that split the homestead off and put it in my name 6 years ago. It was as if that deed did not exist. On Dean Mott's plat, the heart of the property, my 14 acres, my house, my barn, my road frontage, had simply been folded back into the hole and handed to my parents to sell, and the lines were wrong on purpose. I could see it. Up the west side, where my grandfather had shown me the stone wall was the true line, Dean Mott had run the boundary out to the barbed wire fence, the one somebody built 10 feet over to steel grazing a century ago. 10 feet doesn't sound like much until you run it the length of a long parcel. It added the better part of an acre that wasn't theirs. He'd done the same thing at the top, ignored the drill hole in the ledge that my grandfather showed me when I was 9, and instead pulled the corner to a pile of stones. Somebody had bulldozed up, clearing a log landing, picking up more ground that belonged to the neighbor, old Alma Petit, on the adjoining farm. The plat was a wish dressed up as a survey. It described the land my family wanted to own, not the land that was actually there. And then there was the thing that made me set the pencil down. The back 30 acres, the timber lot, the part Roy Keever actually wanted for his house lots, was landlocked. It always had been. The only way in or out was the farm lane that ran up from Tatro Road, and that lane ran across the front 14, across my land. My grandfather never granted an easement for it because for 100 years it had all been one family's ground, and you don't write yourself a right-of-way across your own field. There was no recorded easement. None. Which meant that the 30 acres Roy Keever was preparing to pay good money for could not be reached, legally, without crossing land he didn't know wasn't for sale. I sat in the registry of deeds for a long time with that plat in front of me, and I want to tell you what I felt, because it wasn't what you'd think. It wasn't triumph. It was that old cold stillness, the same one I'd felt at the edge of the trees the day Travis poured his slab. My family was about to commit a fraud. They were going to sit at a closing table and swear, on a sworn affidavit, that they owned land free and clear that they did not own. They were going to sell a stranger a parcel he couldn't get to. They were going to do it with a plat that a man named Dean Mott had cooked to order. And they were going to do all of it without ever once mentioning my name, on land my grandfather had walked me across when I was 9 years old and told me, This is the truth. You can't argue with a corner. I made copies of everything. I drove back to the office. I sat down across from Ruth and I told her the whole thing, the deed, the plat, all of it. Ruth listened without interrupting, which is rare for Ruth, and when I was done, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Cora, you understand that you've been the rightful owner of that homestead for 6 years. I made a promise to my grandfather. Your grandfather is gone," she said gently. "And the people you made it for are about to sell your house out from under you and call it family business." She took her glasses off, which she does when she means something. "You don't have to be loud about this. That's not who you are, and it's not how we do the work. But you are going to have to be true about it. There's a difference between keeping the peace and helping a lie close. You can't help a lie close, honey. The numbers won't let you, and neither will I." I drove home up Tatro Road in the dark. I passed my grandfather's old place, the homestead, my homestead, with the kitchen light on and 3 trucks in the dooryard, and I kept going up to my own little rented house on the ridge, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I opened a new field book. Not a spreadsheet, I'm not an accountant. A surveyor's field book, the green canvas kind, the same kind my grandfather used. On the first page, I wrote the date and the parcel, and underneath it I wrote one line, the way you write a project header before you go out to run the lines. Find the corners, close the traverse, tell the truth. I want to be clear about something, because this is the part people always get wrong about a person like me. I did not go to war. I did not plot revenge in the dark like something out of a movie. I did the most boring thing imaginable. I did my job on my own land the right way for the first time in 6 years. The next Saturday, before light, I loaded my own equipment in the truck, the total station, the data collector, the prism, the steel tape for the short ties, and my grandfather's old brass compass, which I carry for luck and never for measurement. And I drove out to the homestead while my parents were still asleep, and Travis was wherever Travis slept. And I surveyed my grandfather's land the way it should have been surveyed before anyone ever talked about selling it. I started at the iron pin under the big maple at the northeast corner, the one my grandfather put my 9-year-old hand on. It was right where it had always been. I set my instrument over it, and I worked my way around the whole perimeter the way he taught me, monument to monument, the things that were set on purpose. The drill hole in the granite ledge above the spring, exactly where he'd shown me. The stone wall down the west line, every original stone of it, the true boundary, 10 feet inside Dean Mott's fence. A blazed beach at the southwest corner, the old axe scar grown over, but still readable if you knew to look. I found every corner my grandfather ever showed me, and a couple he hadn't, and I tied them all together, and at the end of the long, cold day, I closed my traverse. My last shot came back to the iron pin under the maple, within a fraction of an inch of where I'd started. It closed. The truth always closes. That's how you know it's the truth. Then I overlaid my survey on Dean Mott's plat, and the difference was not subtle. He was out by more than an acre on the west line alone. He'd swallowed a corner of Alma Petit's farm at the top, and running my grandfather's recorded deed through it, the deed Mott had pretended didn't exist, split the whole thing exactly the way my grandfather intended. The front 14, with the house and the barn and the road frontage, came up mine, clean, every corner accounted for. The back 30 came up my father's, landlocked, with no recorded way in. And Travis's pretty little A-frame by the pond came up sitting 41 feet inside my line, which I now had to the 100th of a foot. I drew it all up myself. A clean plat, my license number on it, my seal, my signature with the S that loops to the left the way it has since I learned cursive from Sister Agnes at St. Mary's. I want you to understand what that signature meant to me. For 6 years, my real signature had gone out on tax checks and barn roof invoices and well pump bills, keeping that house standing, and nobody in my family had ever once looked at it or thanked me for it. Now I was going to sign the one document that told the truth about all of it. And that was the signature that was finally going to matter. I drove out one more time that same week to see Alma Petit, because the right thing to do when your survey touches a neighbor's corner is to go tell them in person. Alma was 79 and sharp as a fro, and she'd farmed the adjoining place her whole life and known my grandfather since they were children. I sat at her kitchen table and showed her where Dean Mott's plat had quietly annexed a corner of her land, and her face went hard, and then, slowly, soft. Asa told me what he did, you know, she said, years ago. Told me he'd fixed it so the home place would land on the one of you who'd care for it. Said you were the only Hale left who knew where the corners were. She put her old hand flat on my plat, right over the homestead. He'd be ashamed of the rest of them, not of you. You go on and tell the truth, Cora. I'll stand right next to you when you do. I drove home that night, and I did not cry. But I had to pull over for a minute on the bridge over the brook, because, for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel like a burden. I felt like a witness, and a witness has a job to do. My mother's campaign started before I'd even decided how to handle it, because that's how she'd always worked. She got the story out before the facts could. She didn't call me. She called everyone else. My aunt down in Bar, 2 cousins, the Petersons next door on the other side, Pastor Ray's, the women from the quilting group, the man at the feed store. The story was clean and rehearsed and devastating, and it had clearly been polished in the telling. Cora's gone jealous over the land. Cora's trying to wreck her own family's one chance at some money. Cora always resented her brother. No mention of a recorded deed. No mention that the house had been mine for 6 years. No mention of the word burden set across the table my grandfather built. Just the story my mother needed to be true. My phone filled up with the fallout. Voicemails from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. You're tearing this family apart. Your mother's beside herself. How can you do this to your own father after everything they've done for you? I listened to each one once, all the way through, and then I wrote a single line in the green field book, date, caller, the gist of it, and I deleted the message. Not to torment myself, because a surveyor documents, because if it ever came to it, a pattern is evidence, and I wanted the record clean. On the 4th day, Travis called. First time in over a year. You need to stop whatever you're doing, he said. No hello, Mom's a wreck. The Saddleback guy is asking questions. You're blowing up a deal that's going to set this whole family up. What deal is that, Travis? The land, obviously. Whose land? A pause, and then the old contempt sliding back in. Don't start. Dad's land, our land, the family's land. Travis, I said, where's the line on the west side of that property? Just tell me where the line is. Is it the wall or the fence? What the hell are you talking about? And there it was, the whole thing in one question he couldn't answer. My brother was about to help sell 44 acres he could not have walked the boundary of with a map in his hand. He had built a house on ground he didn't own, because he'd never once cared to ask where the corner was. He'd spent his whole life certain the land was his by some right of being the favorite, and he had never learned a single true thing about it. "You built your cabin on my land," I said quietly. 41 feet over the line. I have it surveyed. I'll send you a copy." He hung up. "I wrote it in the book. Then I called a lawyer. His name was Gordon Slade, a real estate and title attorney in St. Johnsbury, gray at the temples, with 30 years of Vermont land disputes behind him, and a coffee mug on his desk that said measure twice. Ruth had known him for years. I laid it all out on his table: my grandfather's recorded deed, my survey, Dean Mott's plat side by side with mine, and the simple cold fact that there was no recorded easement to the back 30. Gordon went through it slowly, the way I'd have gone through it, and when he was done, he sat back. "Well," he said, "let's take it in order. The homestead's been yours, free and clear, since the day your grandfather died. That's not a question. That's recorded. Your parents have been living there at your sufferance, whether anyone said the word out loud or not." He tapped Mott's plat. "This, though, this is the serious one. This plat omits a recorded deed in the chain of title and misrepresents the boundaries. If your family records this and takes it to a closing and signs an owner's affidavit swearing clear title to all 44 acres, that's not a family squabble anymore. That's a fraud on the buyer and on the title insurer. And the surveyor who stamped it is staring down a complaint to the Board of Land Surveyors that he is not going to enjoy." "I don't want to put my father in prison," I said, and I meant it. That surprised me a little, saying it out loud, but I meant it. Gordon nodded slowly. "You may not have to. Most of this collapses the moment the truth is on the table, because the truth makes the deal impossible. You can't sell what you don't own, and you can't sell access you don't have. The kindest thing you can do for everyone, including your father, is to make sure that truth lands before anyone signs anything. After they sign, it's federal mail fraud and a defrauded buyer. Before they sign, it's just a family that was about to make a terrible mistake." He looked at me over his glasses. "When do they close?" 2 weeks, I said. "There's a signing dinner first, at the house. They're making an event of it. Then you have 2 weeks to decide how you want the truth to arrive." I drove home and I sat with that. And I did one thing that night that I should have done 6 years earlier. I stopped carrying them. The next morning I called the town and had the tax bills for the homestead redirected to me directly in my name as the owner of record, which they should have been all along. I called the propane company and told them the standing order for the house was canceled effective the next fill, because I was done quietly paying to heat a house full of people who'd called me a burden in it. I canceled the plowing contract I'd kept with the man in town as backup. 3 phone calls. It took less than 20 minutes. 6 years of holding a roof over their heads, set down in 20 minutes, calm as anything. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the way you feel when you finally put down a pack you've carried so long you forgot it was heavy. Light enough to be unsteady on your feet. The phone calls turned. Now that the propane and the plowing and the taxes had quietly stopped landing where they always had, the story changed shape. My father called me himself, which he almost never did. It was late, near 11, and I could tell from the wind on the line that he'd stepped out onto the porch where my mother couldn't hear. The porch I'd swept. The porch under the roof I'd paid to put steel on. "Cora," he said, His voice was low and careful, the voice he used his whole life when he was standing on ground he knew belonged to my mother and didn't want to set off a wire. The propane outfit called, said the accounts closed, and the town sent something about the taxes addressed to you. A long pause. Honey, I don't understand what's happening. I think you do, Dad. The wind moved on his end. I let the silence sit there. The silence was his to fill, not mine. I'd filled it for 34 years. I should have said something, he said finally. At the table, when your mother, I should have said something. I've been meaning to say something for a long time. Which time, Dad? He didn't have an answer for that. Your mother had a hard road, he tried. She gave up a lot when you kids were small. She never quite got over it. It comes out sideways. It's not really about you. It's been about me my whole life, I said. That's not your story to smooth over, it's mine. I know. Then, quieter. But you can't blow up this sale, Cora. It's all we've got. The money from Roy Keever, that's our retirement. That's the rest of our lives. Please. Whatever's between you and your mother, don't take it out on me by killing this deal. And there it was. The same thing I'd heard underneath every conversation in that family for 30 years. Not how are you, not I'm sorry. Just please keep the money coming in whatever form the money was taking this season. He'd said some true things, my father. He'd even apologized after a fashion. But the apology was in service of the ask, and the ask was the only reason for the call. Dad, I said, there's something you don't know about that land, and I'm only going to tell you once, gently, because you're my father and I love you and I don't want you to hear it for the first time at a closing table. You can't sell the homestead. Not the house, not the barn, not the road frontage. It isn't yours. It's been mine for 6 years. Grandpa deeded it to me before he died. It's recorded, and the back 30 that Keever actually wants. There's no legal way to reach it except across my land, and Grandpa never granted one. The plat Dean Mott drew is wrong, and parts of it are wrong on purpose. If you sign what they're going to put in front of you, you won't be selling a farm. You'll be swearing to something that isn't true in front of a title company to a man who's going to find out. I'm telling you this so you don't. The line was quiet for a long, long time. I could hear the kitchen clock through the door behind him, the old rooster clock that had hung in that house since before I was born. That can't be right, he said at last, but his voice had no floor under it. Pa wouldn't have. He'd have told me. He told me, I said. He asked me to let you keep your pride. I've kept it for 6 years, Dad. I can't keep it through a fraud. He was quiet again. And then, just before he hung up, so low I almost didn't catch it. Don't tell your mother I called. He loved me. I do believe that. He just loved his quiet more. 2 nights before the signing dinner, Travis came to my door. I heard the truck before the knock, and then the knock came hard enough to rattle the storm door. I'm not a small woman and I'm not easily frightened, but I left the chain on and opened it to the width of the chain. And through the gap, I could see my brother's face, unshaved, his eyes red, wearing the same canvas barn coat he wore to look like a man who worked. Take it back, he said. Whatever you sent the lawyer, whatever survey you did, take it back. I can't take back where the corners are, Travis. You're going to ruin everything. Do you understand that? Keever's lawyer is asking about the access. They pulled some old deed. Mom's not sleeping. Dad looks like a ghost. His voice cracked and climbed. And now there's some letter from the state about Dean. The Board of Land Surveyors, I said. Yes. Dean stamped a plat that misrepresents a boundary and omits a recorded deed. That's a violation. He's going to answer for it. That's not me, Travis. That's him. And the day he decided his license was for sale. He did it as a favor. He did it for money, and so did you. I kept my voice level. It's a thing I can do, the level voice, even when something in me is shaking. You built a house on my land. You helped cook up a survey to sell land that isn't yours. You let Mom call me a burden in Grandpa's kitchen, and you laughed. And now you're at my door at 10 at night because you finally found something you can't charm your way around. A corner, a piece of iron in the ground that doesn't care who Mom's favorite is. He hit the door frame with the flat of his hand. That land is supposed to be mine. And there it was, the truest thing my brother ever said to me. Not it's ours, not it's the family's. Mine, the whole architecture of his life in one word. A thing he was owed by birthright that he'd never measured, never maintained, never earned, and never once gone out to find the corners of. Go home, Travis, I said. I don't have a home if you do this, he said. You'll have taken it. I didn't take anything. I'm the only one who ever knew where it actually was. And I closed the door and slid the bolt and stood there with my hand flat on the wood until I heard his truck back out and the gravel quiet down. Then I went and sat at my kitchen table and opened the green field book and wrote the date and the time and 3 words. Travis. At door. And under it, because Ruth had taught me you always note the conditions. Wind out of the north, hard frost coming. The signing dinner was set for a Friday evening at the homestead. I knew because the whole town knew. My mother had told it everywhere like a wedding. Roy Keever would come up from the valley with his lawyer and the papers. There'd be a celebration dinner first, and then everyone would sit at my grandfather's butternut table, and the Hales would sell the family land, and finally be the kind of people my mother always believed they were meant to be. Gordon Slade asked me how I wanted the truth to arrive, and I'd thought about it for 2 weeks. And in the end, the answer was the same answer my grandfather gave me when I was 9. You go to the corner, and you put your hand on it, and you let people see for themselves. I didn't go to ambush anyone. I want you to understand that. I went to stop a fraud before it became a crime, and to do it in front of enough witnesses that nobody could later say it never happened. Gordon came with me. Alma Petit came in her good coat because she'd promised she'd stand next to me, and Alma Petit has never broken a promise in 79 years. And I brought a manila folder, a plain beige folder, nothing dramatic with the recorded deed, my sealed survey, Dean Mott's plat marked up in red, and a short letter from Gordon laying out, in 3 calm paragraphs, exactly why there was nothing on that table anyone could lawfully sign. We drove up Tatro Road at dusk. There were 6 vehicles in the dooryard, and the kitchen windows were gold with light, and you could see them all moving around in there. My mother in the burgundy sweater I'd bought her 3 Christmases ago, Travis holding court, Roy Keever's clean white pickup parked closest to the door like it already lived there. I sat in the truck for a moment with my hand on the folder. Beside me, Gordon said, "You don't have to do this in front of all of them. We could just file. The deal would die on its own in a week." He showed me the corners in front of people. I said, "He didn't do it in secret. He did it out loud, so I'd never doubt it." I picked up the folder. I'm going to do it the same way. I walked up the porch steps I'd swept that morning a lifetime ago, and I let myself in with the key I'd had since college, the key to my own house, and the warm noise of the kitchen stopped like a record lifted off. My mother saw me first. "Cora, you're not, this is a private, Mom." I said it gently. I wasn't there to shout. Before anyone signs anything, somebody needs to put the truth on this table, and it's going to be me, because I'm the only one here who knows where it is. Roy Keever stood up. He was a big, careful man, and he could read a room, and he could see I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there with a lawyer and a folder and an old woman in a good coat. And you are? Cora Hale. I'm a licensed land surveyor, and I'm the recorded owner of the 14 acres this house is sitting on. You could feel the room change pressure. Travis came up out of his chair. She's lying. She's jealous. Don't listen to. I set the folder on the butternut table, on the exact spot where my coffee mug had sat 2 weeks before, and I opened it. And I laid the documents out the way my grandfather laid out his map, flat, smoothed with the side of my hand, in order. This is the deed my grandfather recorded at the Caledonia County Registry of Deeds, I said. Book 214, page 88. It divides this property. It conveys the back 30 acres to my father by will, and it conveys the front 14, this house, this barn, the sugar bush, the spring, and all the frontage on Tatro Road to me outright, with a life estate reserved to himself. He died 6 years ago. The day he died, this house became mine. It has been mine in the public record for 6 years. I turned the page. This is my survey, sealed and signed last week, tied to the original monuments my grandfather set and showed me. This is the plat Mr. Dean Mott prepared for this sale. I laid the two side by side. Mr. Keever, I'd ask you to look at the west line. Mr. Mott ran it to a barbed wire fence. The true line is a stone wall, 10 feet inside it. His plat sells you the better part of an acre of my neighbor's land. This is my neighbor. I nodded to Alma. She's here to tell you the same. That's the truth, Alma said, clear as a bell. I've known where that wall stood for 70 years, and I've known what Asa Hale did with this place, because he told me himself. I turned the last page. And this, I said, is the part that matters most for you, Mr. Keever, so I'll be plain. The 30 acres you want to build on are landlocked. The only access is the lane that runs up from the road, and that lane crosses my 14 acres, and there is no recorded easement. None. My grandfather never granted one, because for 100 years it was all one family. You cannot reach the land you're buying without crossing land that isn't for sale. If you sign tonight, you'll own 30 acres you can't legally drive a truck to. And the people selling it to you would be swearing, in writing, that they own all of it free and clear, which they don't, and that you'll have access, which you won't. The kitchen was dead silent. Roy Keever looked at the documents for a long time. He was not a stupid man. He looked at the deed and the two plats side by side, and then he looked at his lawyer, who had gone very still, and then he looked at my mother. Mrs. Hale, he said slowly, is any of this not true? My mother's mouth opened and closed. She's Cora's always been. Is the deed real? Keever asked. Is it recorded, yes or no? And my mother, for the first time in my entire life, had nothing to say. It was my father who answered. He was sitting at the foot of the table in my grandfather's chair, and he hadn't moved or spoken since I came in. He looked down at the deed, at his own father's careful handwriting, and something went out of him, some long-held breath of a story he'd been telling himself for 6 years. It's real, my father said. His voice was barely there. Pa's hand, that's Pa's hand. I'd know it anywhere. He looked up at me, and his eyes were wet. He really did it. He gave it to her. He gave it to the one who'd keep it, Alma said, not unkindly. Roy Keever closed his folder, the one with all the papers, the pen still lying across the top untouched. Then there's nothing to sign, he said, and I think I'd be a fool to spend another minute at this table. He stood, and he nodded to me, surveyor to client almost, a professional courtesy. "Thank you for the survey, MS. Hale. You probably saved me a lawsuit and a year of my life." And he and his lawyer put on their coats and walked out into the dark. And a moment later, the clean white pickup backed out of the dooryard, and its lights swung down Tatro Road and were gone. What was left in that kitchen was just family, and the truth, and the long butternut table between us. My mother found her voice the way she always did, by raising it. "After everything we did for you, we raised you, we fed you. And you wait until there's money on the table, and you do this, you humiliate us in our own." Mom, I didn't shout. I have never in my life had to shout to be heard. I just had to finally be willing to be heard. "Name one thing. You said I was a burden. You've said it my whole life. So name one thing I cost this family that I didn't pay back twice over." I put my hand flat on the table. "I paid the taxes on this house for 6 years. I put the roof on that barn. I replaced the well pump at midnight in January. I plowed that lane every storm while you told the women at church I do some kind of measuring. I kept this place standing while Travis sank your savings into websites and side-by-sides and pods that never came. A burden doesn't do that, Mom. A burden doesn't quietly carry a house full of people who can't be bothered to learn what she does for a living." Travis came around the table. "You did all that because you wanted the land. You've been playing the long game this whole." "I did all that," I said, turning to him, "because Grandpa asked me to let Dad keep his pride. And I kept that promise for 6 years, right up until the moment keeping it meant helping the 3 of you commit a fraud. You want to know the difference between us, Travis? You built a house on this land without ever once asking where the line was. I've known where every corner of it is since I was 9. You think the land is yours because you're owed it. It's mine because I'm the only one who ever bothered to learn the truth about it. Your cabin is 41 feet over the line. It's on my property. I've got the survey. We'll deal with that part later." Travis looked, for the first time in his life, like a man who'd run out of road. The charm was gone, and underneath it was nothing but a boy who'd been told his whole life that the world owed him, standing in a house that had never been his, in a county that was about to read all about it. My father stood up slowly, one hand on the table for his back, and he came around to me. And for a second, I thought he might try to hug me, and I didn't know what I'd have done if he had, but he didn't. He reached into the pocket of his old wool shirt, and he took out something small and worn, and he put it in my hand. It was the brass compass. My grandfather's brass compass that had belonged to his father, the one Asak carried in his coat the day he first walked me out to find the corners. My father had taken it off the mantle. "He'd have wanted you to have this," my father said. "Should have given it to you 6 years ago. I think I always knew." I closed my hand around it. It was cold and heavy, and it fit my palm the way it had fit my grandfather's. "Good night, Dad," I said. I picked up my folder, and I left the survey on the table for them to keep, because they were going to need to understand it, and I walked out the front door of my own house into the cold, and Alma took my arm on the steps, and Gordon held the truck door, and we drove down Tatro Road in the dark. I didn't look back at the gold windows. I'd looked at them long enough. If you've made it this far, then you already understand that this was never about a piece of land. It was about being the one who tells the truth in a family that survives on the story. Subscribe to Suspense Stories and type the word corner in the comments if you believe what my grandfather believed, that the truth always closes, no matter how long people argue with it. Stay with me, because what happened in the months after that kitchen is the part I'm proudest of. The law did what the law does. Slowly, without passion, in order, Dean Mott answered to the Board of Land Surveyors that winter. They didn't take his license forever. He'd been careful enough in his career to make it just this one provable thing. But they suspended it, fined him, and put him under a board-ordered review of every plat he'd stamped in 3 years, which is its own kind of sentence for a man who works fast and cheap. The work dried up. The last I heard, Dean Mott was doing construction, staking for an outfit 2 counties over, holding the dumb end of somebody else's tape. There's a justice in that I try not to enjoy too much. Roy Keever walked, and he told people why. The way developers talk to each other, and the Hale land got a quiet reputation in certain offices as a parcel with a problem. Nobody came back with another offer. There wasn't going to be a windfall. There was never going to be a windfall, because the windfall had always been a fiction sitting on top of a corner nobody but me had bothered to find. My parents could not stay in the homestead, and we all knew it. It was mine, legally, plainly, and the pretending was over. I did not throw my father out of his childhood home. I'm not built that way, and my grandfather wouldn't have wanted it. But I didn't let it stay a lie, either. Gordon drew up a simple lease, a real one, fair market and modest, and I rented my parents the house for as long as they wanted it, with the rent set to cover the taxes and the upkeep I'd been silently paying for 6 years. My mother called it an insult. My father signed it. He understood, I think, that being a tenant who pays is more honest than being an owner who never was. They live there still, the 2 of them. My mother and I do not really speak. My father calls sometimes, on the porch with the wind on the line, and we talk about the weather and the woodpile, and it is not much, but it is true, and true is more than we ever had. Travis's cabin was the thornier thing legally, but a 41-foot encroachment is not a close question. Gordon sent the letter. Travis raged, and then Travis got a lawyer of his own who told him exactly what mine had told me, which is that you cannot keep a house you built on land you don't own. In the end, I didn't make him tear it down. I'm not interested in rubble. I bought the cabin from him for the cost of his materials, which was more than fair and more than he deserved, and it gave him a little money to land on, and it made the thing mine and legal and done. He took the money and moved down to the valley. He sells trucks now, I'm told. He's good at it. He was always good at the part where you make a person want a thing, and me, I kept the land. All of it, in a way, because once the dust settled my father, and I worked something out about the back 32. But that's a quieter story for another day. What I want to tell you about is the homestead, the 14 acres my grandfather walked me across when I was 9. I had it placed under a conservation easement that spring, recorded at the same registry of deeds where my grandfather recorded his deed, so that no developer ever cooks a plat over that ground again, so that the stone walls stay the lines forever. And I reopened the sugar house. It had sat cold for 6 years, the evaporator dusty, the lines coiled in the corner. The first March it was mine, I cleaned it out, and I tapped the sugar bush my grandfather tapped his whole life, and I opened the doors. Not as a business, as the thing my grandfather always said it should be, a place where the whole hollow comes when the sap runs. The neighbors came. Alma Petit came and sat by the arch in the steam like a queen. Kids from town came and held the far end of things and learned, the way I learned, that the work is the point. Ruth came up from St. Johnsbury, and we boiled until 2 in the morning and didn't say much, because some people you don't have to. I hung 2 things on the wall of that sugar house, side by side, where the steam wouldn't reach them. My grandfather's hand-drawn map of the 44 acres, the one he carried under his arm the day he first said, "Come on, surveyor," and my recorded survey, sealed and signed, the corners all closed. My family spent 30 years telling me I was a burden, the dead weight, the one who just measured dirt for other people. And it turned out I was the only one carrying the whole place, and the only one who ever knew exactly where it stood. I keep the brass compass on the windowsill above my kitchen sink now, where the morning light hits it. I don't use it to measure, the needle's a hair off, the way old things are. I keep it because of what my grandfather told me with it in his hand when I was 9 years old, kneeling at the iron pin under the big maple. And what I've found to be true on every job and in every hard year since. The corners don't lie. People do. You can argue with a person forever, and a person can tell you any story they need to be true. But the iron in the ground was set there on purpose, by someone who wanted the ones who came after to know exactly where the truth was. You just have to be willing to go out in the cold and find it. And when you finally run your lines all the way around, monument to monument, the truth always closes. It always comes home to where it started. It just sometimes takes a long, long time to walk it. That's where my story ends, and where the Hale Hollow sugar bush begins. A recorded deed. A stone wall that was always the line. A brass compass on a windowsill, and a folder I never had to open more than once. If you've ever been the quiet one holding everything together, the one they forgot to thank, the one they called a burden right up until the day they found out what you really were, you already know where the corners are. Share this story with someone who needs it. Leave a comment and tell me about the corner you finally went out and found, and subscribe to Suspense Calm Stories. I'll see you next time.